Hello, everyone, and welcome to our book club live with Spooky Middle Grade and our special guest this month, Ira Marcks, author of Shark Summer. We're super excited to have you. Yes, show off the beautiful cover. And so before we get started, I just want to remind everyone watching, we are going to be taking your questions. So if you have a question, pop it in the comments. And we're going to start out just introducing everyone here on our panel, and we'll save Ira and special guest behind him for last. But Fleur, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your books?
I am Fleur Bradley. I write middle grade mysteries, and sometimes they're a little bit spooky, like Midnight at the Barclay Hotel, which you can kind of see behind me, which is about these three kids that are invited to a hotel to solve a mystery, the mystery of the murder of Mr. Barclay. But I'm really excited today to talk about Ira's book. Can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah, and actually, if you missed our discussion last month, it was all about Midnight at the Barclay Hotel. So you can check that out on our channel. And Adriana, over to you.
So, hi everyone, I'm Adriana Cuevas. I am the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, a contemporary fantasy about a boy who can talk to animals, and Cuba in My Pocket, a historical fiction about a boy who's sent from Cuba to the United States by himself. But having grown up in Florida and all the, we used to try to scare each other in the water all the time with shark tales. So I very much enjoyed Shark Summer, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm Kim Manchella, author of a variety of books for young readers. Ooh, I've never seen a shark, though. I've never been eaten by a shark, which is good because I'm still here today. And the only sharks I've really encountered are when you're in a swimming pool and you just get that really strange feeling like you know there's a shark in there, even though there probably isn't, but you really know there is one. So that's my only experience. But Shark Summer, of course, has a much more interesting shark. But let's send it over to Ira. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the special guest who is just lurking ominously behind you?
Right. Well, my name's Ira Marcks. I'm our book club's resident graphic novelist tonight. And Shark Summer is the first in a series. So it's not really a series yet till there's more, I guess. But it's the first in this kind of spooky middle grade meta movie adventure Scooby-Doo-ish series of books. And when I was working on Shark Summer, I was doing a lot of research on the movie Jaws and Martha's Vineyard and sharks and whatnot. And I met this fine woman here. This is Brenda T. Shark. She was actually one of the stunt sharks in the original film Jaws. So her name's actually not in the credits, but any of the scenes where the shark is swimming around and, like attacking boats and things, that's actually her. So she's joining us tonight. I asked her to sit extremely still and not blink or do any sort of abrupt movements to scare the audience. So if you have any questions, maybe we can take some at the end for her.
Do sharks blink?
Let me ask.
Yeah, let's ask the expert.
She says no.
I didn't think so.
Okay, we've got Miss Animal Facts down in
Yep.
the corner here. So let's get that. Yeah, I love it. Oh, Brenda. Well, we're going to have some big questions for Brenda, but let's start with questions all about Shark Summer. And I love the way you described it because it is this kind of like meta. Like you think it's like one thing, and it's like this other layer of like meta sort of happens. So I love that. So I'm like interested in kind of like your storytelling process, and you talk a lot about story in the book, like as these aspiring filmmakers who are trying to win this contest are trying to find their story, and then their story within the story kind of evolves. So tell me a little bit about how you found your story that you wanted to tell.
Yeah, well, I can say that it wasn't necessarily a story I was seeking out as like the thing I wanted to make in 2019. I had been pitching some other things with my editor that were more fantasy and even some like future dystopian science fiction stuff, because I thought that's what I was good at, because that's stuff I love. But my editor, she's like, I don't I want to do something set in the real world. That's sort of like what I want to establish here. She had just moved to Little Brown Publishing, and that's what she wanted to do. I'm like, oh, that's not quite up my alley. I've done like educational comics before, but I didn't necessarily want to do something in the real world until I realized that, I mean, I've always loved movies, and I love reading books and listening to podcasts and whatnot about the behind the scenes of films. And I always thought that the summer that Jaws was filmed on Martha's Vineyard in 1974 could have, you know, magically been an amazing thing to be a part of. I'm sure it was awful for some people and stressful and just, you know, but in my imagination, that summer was like kind of a really cool time to be there. And summer's just great anyway, but like a Jaws summer where there's just a mechanical shark and not a real shark could be amazing. So I kind of pitched around this idea of what would it be like to be on the island while Jaws is being filmed, and what sort of happens at this moment in time for Martha's Vineyard, where it switches from just a little quaint New England island to like the setting of what will become a blockbuster film. And now, of course, like the two are totally connected. Like tourism is not as much maybe now, but like for a long time, tourism and Jaws were like a big deal for that island. So it really changed how people viewed the island, and she liked that idea. So then I just started digging into it. And then you can see, we can get into the plot a little later, but you can see where me wanting to tell like scary stories, I crammed it into this real world setting. So that's kind of the origin story.
Yeah, I love how the spooky elements find a way of coming through, but like you said, it's a lot about these real kids that are trying to find the story they want to tell. And they're also trying to, like, I guess, redefine their own stories as people, which was like really another interesting turn that it took. So I love all of that. Like you said, yeah, I don't want to get too deep into it, right? And before we talk about some of the spooky elements or I guess the real world influences. And you mentioned this too, like in the back of the book, which I like. So if you have the book and you flip to the very back, and usually you see like the author's picture and the little author's note, but it was fun because Ira, yeah, and we can show it, you got to draw yourself. so partly I'm wondering, like, what is it like to draw yourself? And one of the things you talk about in that note is that there are kind of more real world influences than people might realize. So I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit, like what in this book is kind of drawn from real life and the setting, and with the kind of spooky story too, and what is made up.
Well, so I think a lot of we all have these lives outside of being authors, and sometimes an author is able to keep those separate, and you don't often see like the influence of their like other jobs or whatever in their writing necessarily. But for me, like I've always survived being a teacher. I don't have a teaching degree, but I teach freelance. I teach with homeschool groups, and whoever will have me, I teach at art centers and do school visits, of course. And I've always like made my living doing that. So I've been lucky because my mom was a teacher and I just kind of picked it up from her. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but as I was working on Shark Summer, I'm like, oh, there's a big part of this book that's kind of teaching you the responsibility of being a good storyteller. And I think that tone and that certain characters, like there's a prop master who like teaches the kids a bit about filmmaking. And then of course there's like cinematography, and they talk about editing a little bit in scripts. And I was realizing that, oh, like all these years I've been teaching, trying to get a book deal, it's like all that stuff became what my book was about. And, you know, sometimes I think we're like, oh, we don't have enough time to write. It's like, oh, I think I'm the writer I am because I've spent like 30 or, you know, not 30, but like 20 years in classrooms. So that was like a big part of, for me, the foundation of being able to talk to kids about being a responsible storyteller, especially if you set something in the real world. I think there's, you gotta be careful with that sort of thing.
Like, wait a minute, 30 years in the classroom. Are you?
I'm
Is that
75.
I was 75 years old. Okay. Okay, well, and I do want to give our other panelists, I have 1,000 questions, of course, but I want to give our other panelists a chance to ask some questions. And reminder, get those questions down in the chat for people out there listening. So let me turn it over, Adriana. I see you're dying and you're unmuted, so let me give you a chance.
No, I loved it. And because I mean, what Kim said was true. There's so many layers to this story. Like part of me, when I kept turning the page and like something new would pop up, I was kind of, well, I was jealous. Let me put it that way, because it was just so well done. But I think one of the parts that I really, really liked, because I always like it when the books that I'm reading like have this emotional element that just kind of sneaks in there. Like that's not what the story is about, but it is kind of this one layer that you have. And the one layer that I noticed was the kids' relationships with their parents and the expectations of the parents onto the kids and how that affected what the kids did and how they behaved. And so I guess as we were talking about like real world influences, not that like we're going to drag each other into therapy or anything, but I guess what I'm wondering is like, sometimes for me, that kind of stuff just pops up when I'm writing, or sometimes it's intentional. And so I was wondering for you, like, was it intentional for you to include that theme of, you know, the relationship with our parents and how that affects us?
Yeah, I think that became what I really wanted it to be about by the time like with comics, there's so many, I mean, all books have many stages, but comics have this whole scripting side that happens, or at least for me, before I even draw anything. Some artists just jump right into like thumbnails and sketching, but I do a lot of writing before I draw anything. And as I was working on the script, I was like, I want the believability was really important, because I think it makes the kind of scary stuff scarier, because there's no actual supernatural stuff in the book. There's like implications of it. And sometimes I think that can be like a scarier thing. And I think also making the adults very believable adds weight to like the kids' adventures, because it's tough to make a book where kids are running wild without like parents paying attention. Of course, like we can, you know, we want that to happen. But I think when there's like, you can get a sense that the parents are having their own adventure within the story is important. And I had started doing this science fiction book about this young kid, and her mom was like this rebel leader on this space moon, and her parents had been separated, and she reunites, or she seeks out her mom later, but her mom is like this criminal. And I wanted the book to be just as much about the mom as the kid. And my agent, who is amazing, was like, I don't think we can sell this. You're shifting to the adult's point of view too often. And that kind of, I don't know, it just was really frustrating, because I thought when I was a kid, I wanted to know what grownups were doing. I wanted to read grown-up things. I wanted to understand grown-up life. And with Shark Summer, I'm like, all right, I know I can't quite like tell the adult story, but I want to give the adults a real sense of personality in this. And then that was able to like tie the mom to wanting to open an ice cream shop. And then it put just a great little bow on the end of the story, where everybody, you know, it's got a happy ending, where there could have been a less happy ending if you wanted, but having the adult in just kind of brought it all together a little better, and just opened up the conversation a bit more.
Well, and I thought the adults are very real too. Like you're very, you let them be human, I guess. Sometimes the way adults are portrayed in Kidlit, it's like this one-dimensional authority figure. But like, I really liked the main character's mom, because she was open about like the financial struggles and her having to get a different job, and just the way that I really liked how she and her daughter talked about like how open they were with that kind of stuff, because I think that's a good thing for kids to see. But yeah, the adults were human too. They weren't those like the Peanuts talking head, you know, in the background kind of thing.
Yeah, it could give you a little insight into like the side of the story that, you know, the movie Steven Spielberg being there, and the hotel, the Grand Atlantic isn't the name of the hotel on the island, but the whole film crew had stayed at the big hotel on Martha's Vineyard, and they made a mess of it because there was like all these, you know, Hollywood folks there just like throwing food in the pool and like losing their minds trying to make this movie. So I was like, oh, I can have the mom working there. So there's parts of the script where you would see her, but they got cut out of the story. But there was going to be a little more time spent watching her work really hard to just try to like fulfill her dream. But, you know, you only got 300 pages in a comic and things have to move really quickly. So.
Yeah. No, yeah, I love that. I love the realism that you brought to it. And I love, so going back to like there's like the four main kids and their stories. And there's this one line where they say like, we're all trapped in our own stories. And it kind of comes around to that. Like they're trying to tell the story that they think is going to win this big contest so they can help like solve these money problems maybe, but then in the end, you know, the story just keeps evolving and evolving, and in the end maybe it wasn't even the story that was on camera that they were really like learning about that summer. So I just thought that was really cool. And I don't know, I'm just like wondering, like, where did that come from? Like with your inspiration starting with Jaws and then going, you know, and like going into this different place where it's about these kids who are kind of like being defined by other people in their lives, but like they're trying to like make their own way at the same time.
There's like an unlikely influence from Jaws that I like bring up. I don't know. Have y'all seen Jaws? Everyone out there?
Oh, it's been like since it, you know, I probably saw it. I don't know when it came out. I saw it when I was a kid. Like I haven't seen it since then.
So there's a scene in I guess it's in the beginning of the third act when they set out to finally catch the shark, and the really grumpy Quint, the grumpy like shark hunter who they've hired he's got the boat and he's got the drive. He wants to kill the shark. He tells this really dark story that goes on for minutes. It kind of like halts the film as he talks about being in the military and the story of this submarine that was hit by a torpedo, and it's kind of like belly up and all the crewmen are sitting on top. And then there's blood in the water. So sharks start swimming around and slowly the men are picked off. And it's like a really dark story. And it's this monologue. And he has this one line about looking at the shark in the eye and how they have like these black unblinking doll's eyes. And I'm like, well, that's like very Lovecraftian-ish. It's like stare into the void and it stares back type of thing. And I wanted to kind of take that idea and make that the story of Martha's Vineyard. So it's like, oh, well, there's this man on the island who believes that these sharks are like gods. And that sort of became the story within the story, because I was like, oh, it would be fun if you start this book and you think it's about Jaws, but then it's actually about this story that's a lot like weirder and darker than Jaws even is. It just goes in this whole other direction. So kind of that mechanic was a big thing for me. And so that little part in Jaws that you wouldn't think would be a main influence ended up actually being like the thing, because, you know, it's fun to like pull the deep cuts out of something and see if people get it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and you were talking about like comics and graphic novels and how they have to move at this really fast pace. So that's interesting to me. I mean, as someone who has only done novels, but I do love reading graphic novels. I mean, can you just talk about it from like the storytelling perspective? Like, what do you think is different when you're setting out to write like a graphic novel script versus a novel? And do you do like the script and the art like separately, or are they always together, like in your mind?
I guess I think about it a bit like a movie production, because I'm very familiar. Like there's not a lot of documentation on how to really put together a graphic novel. I mean, there's lots of stuff about like novel authors and books on how to write, but there's only a couple books on making graphic novels. So it's really hard to know how to do it other than whatever weird way you made up. And even in publishing, there's still like all kinds of weird things with deadlines, because it takes, you know, visual style is such a big thing. It could take somebody like 5 years to draw something that someone might be able to draw in like 9 months. So it's kind of a giant mess, I guess, with making a graphic novel. But for me, I always script it out like a movie, try to imagine as much as I can in my head. So then I can start editing early on. I think we all know how important editing is at this point in our career. Once you do a book, at least one book, I feel like you're like, oh, editing is like the magic. So with a comic, sometimes it can be hard to edit out, because if you take a panel out, everything has to shift to fill it in. And then you lose, you know, like the way you've laid out your pages. So I'm always very careful to write first before I start laying out the pages. So once I've written a script, then I start putting the dialogue on pages, and it's all in my brain as I'm doing this. Then I finally start to sketch when I mostly have the dialogue paced out. So I think a lot about what it looks like when you open a spread and what happens at the bottom of the page for when you turn it. There's all kinds of, theories on how to get somebody to turn a page with a comic, and having it be so visual, it's like a big important thing. Whereas like a novel, you just type and then whatever happens. I don't know if y'all think about how a page ends. Like you probably think about how chapters end, I'm sure, but not so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's similar but different, because we don't think about it in terms of like the actual visual page, because we don't control that. It's like the typesetters and the book designers that do that. So we don't design that part. But yeah, definitely like those like chapter hooks and things like that. But yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm pretty sure we have some like graphic novelists and aspiring graphic novelists that are listening tonight. So if anyone has any questions about like the process side that you want to ask, definitely get those in the comments. But let me turn it over to Fleur. I've just been talking like so much, and I want to give you a chance to ask a question. So let me turn it your way.
Well, you kind of asked my question, which was, for me as a novelist, it's so interesting to
I stole your
look at
question.
the process. Yeah, so you stole my thunder. But no, it's been wonderful just to hear you, Ira, talk about how your storytelling is different, how the process is different, how there's so many different things to think about. Something I was wondering, because it struck me as I started to read the book, is A, how great the dialogue is, and B, how strong your style is. And as a writer, you develop a voice. So all of us that write a straightforward novel, we all have a sort of style that develops over time. And I was wondering if that's the same for you as a graphic novelist, or how do you feel like you've arrived where you are with Shark Summer?
Yeah. Well, I struggled for a long time with, and maybe I even haven't nailed it yet, but aligning the story I want to tell with the tone of the visuals. And I'm sure y'all can struggle with that in the tone of your stories. Like if you're making something for a middle grade, there's places you can't push it too far in certain directions, because there's kind of this narrow market that we're trying to follow as professionals who want to sell books. With comics, it can be a little different, because first of all, people in general think graphic novels are just for kids or an adult guilty pleasure. I know they're very mainstream now, but still, like even today, somebody was talking to me in my building about, I'm into comics, and they're all my kids, but sometimes I read them too. It's like, it's okay. Like you can read any story, but I think sometimes my style, it's very cartoonish, and the lines are big and fat, and the characters have like big, clear faces with basic geometric shapes. Like the kid Elijah, he doesn't even really have eyes. He just has big, giant glasses. And I think people see that and they're like, oh, this is going to be a very light story, and I'm going to read it once and then it's over. And I think a lot of editors were seeing that same thing, because I have a million rejection letters that are like, I like this, not with Shark Summer, but other stories. They're like, I like the story you're trying to tell, but the art isn't lining up for me. So I think I had to find an editor that appreciated like the middle ground, but I think a lot of it was trying to match the way I wrote with how I drew. So a lot of things go unsaid, which actually I think makes the dialogue stronger, because I end up cutting so much because I don't want characters to get too philosophical, or things you could do with a more mature book. And just keep things moving. I guess again, it comes back to editing. I think when you write, your confidence lets you cut things out or imply things, and then that becomes a big part of style. And I think drawing can be like that too. You reduce how you draw to save time and just to get things across in simpler form. So, I guess confidence is part of the style thing too.
Were you ever tempted to change your style after all those rejections? Like, were you ever tempted to make your style a little bit darker, I guess I would say, to like match your story? Or were you like, no, I like how I'm presenting my characters?
Yeah, like I could show you concept art for Shark Summer that was darker. The kids looked a little older. They were taller in general, like their bodies were more adult proportions. Their heads were a little smaller. There was a little more grit and grime and texture. And my editor was like, all right, I like these like she looked at my website and was like, okay, I like this and this. I think this can match. And so there's always compromise. I mean, some artists can just go and maybe they're lucky enough that they can just draw however they draw. But yeah, I'm still always negotiating something. Like sometimes I'll draw something in a panel, like in Shark Summer, you see the severed head of it's a prop, but it's like a severed head of a man that like is from Jaws. And I had to draw that like 3 times before my editor was like, okay, this is fine. Cause the first one was way too gross. So I had to like reduce the bloody griminess. So it's just interesting what a drawing can imply. It's like if you make it too gritty, it can be too dark for a middle grade without saying anything. So it's interesting. So yeah, there's compromises with the style stuff.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting to think about. I mean, all the parallels, but also just kind of totally different concerns. But I now I'm really interested. I love it. I want to just, I have so many ideas. But yeah, this is so cool. And I know like there are so many people that are, and we have Nanette who says, I liked your book. Me too. I also liked Shark Summer and loved it. But I'm also curious because you talked about like not just kind of adjusting your style nowadays, but like other projects that you might have had in the past that maybe did get rejections. So I'm wondering, like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey getting to Shark Summer? You mentioned like doing some educational work, but have you had like other graphic novel projects before too that you kind of developed along the way?
Yeah, well, at this point, everything I've finished, Shark Summer you have to buy, but everything else that I've self-published or done for like educational purposes, it's all for free at iramarcks.com. So about up until 5 years ago, I was illustrating by hand with watercolor in like a quill pen dipped in ink. So that was like, you know, a big shift in my style to go digital and kind of relearn how to draw. So before that, it's just funny how a technique, like if you sat down to write on a typewriter, you actually might write a different book than you might on a laptop, I think. I don't know. I think sometimes
I might write a really angry book because it would be so hard to like do it. Yeah, I'd be like,
yeah, exactly. So like with drawing, working by hand, I think I had a different tone of story I wanted to tell because there was like a different type of texture in my work. And I wanted these more like mythical, whimsical. I was writing this book called The Aquarium Drift. That was like an illustrated novel available on my website, which is a more like mythical, allegorical adventure about like a journey to the end of the earth in search of a giant sea serpent. So it's very like fantastical. And then when I moved to digital, it was because I was assigned a project to make a book about the creative economy. And I interviewed like 100 people about their creative jobs. Like I could have done it with y'all, just asking you like truthfully what your day is like. It's like, yeah, I'm a writer, but the truth is, here's what my day consists of. Because I think kids just don't know the truth about that stuff. So that was the purpose of the book, was to pull back the curtain on real life creative businesses. And but I drew it in a really cartoony way, so it was fun. And I even got to meet Eric Carle and talk about his journey because he's from upstate New York originally. He's from like Syracuse. So that was kind of if you looked at that book, you would see Shark Summer has a bit of that book in it. That's kind of like pulling back the curtain on what it means to do a creative job. So you know, that plus like my interest in fantasy, all of it just sort of collided with Shark Summer. So I've done a bunch of books, but Shark Summer was like my first like major publisher. So you've probably all like had this feeling with like the book that you're like, this could actually be it, and you want to put so many ideas in it. That's probably why Shark Summer is like, whoa, this is pretty dense.
That's hilarious.
You know, it's like you got to say it all just in case.
Just in case, just cram it in there. Yeah.
Just in case this is the one.
The sequel's going to be like 20 pages.
Yeah,
exactly.
Out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, in there. Yeah. No, but it was more like you said, it's like peeling back these layers. Like just when you think you figured out the story, you're like, oh, it's this story and it's this story. But I can really see like kind of the influence of your book about creatives, because that's what these kids are. Like they're these creatives who are trying to figure out the creative process. So that's kind of cool that you've like got that in there. And especially for kids, because a lot of times kids are told like you can't make money in a creative field and you have to do something that's more realistic where you can actually get paid. So I love that you're kind of like showing kids like learning about that process and doing something creative, and it actually works out more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, I'm wondering, like, because I know we do have a lot of creatives out there, and I think we have some creatives listening tonight. So doing that book where you're interviewing all of these people and kind of like learning about their daily lives and the real, what they really do, did you come away with any lessons that you've applied to your own life as a creative?
Yeah, I mean, when you ask if I've adjusted my style to accommodate something, I think just seeing that everybody struggles so much, it made me realize you don't really actually have to compromise. You just have to like believe and keep going, and just hopefully odds are it's going to work. Like changing your style isn't going to be the thing that gets you somewhere. And just watching, people either like have success really young and then have it disappear, or like have these weird, just this like kind of plateau of like weird, cool jobs forever, or people that finally make it when they're like 70. It was just cool to like get this crazy perspective on what people were doing. And, it's like, it's a book for kids. So everybody's trying to be encouraging and positive. So it's not like 50 sad stories about like the trials and tribulations. It's like, you can do it, kind of, even though it's being honest, it's like a fine line. So I learned a lot. There was one that really, I'll share this one that, the Eric Carle one is like the cool one because he's like an icon and I got to just hear his life story. But I talked to this woman who wanted to be an actor, and she kind of was, but her job was at a hospital, and she was a patient simulator. I don't know what the term is. So like student doctors need like fake patients to work on. So she has to pretend she has the flu or is 9 months pregnant for these doctors. So I don't know the details of it exactly.
Wait, I saw that Seinfeld episode. Have you seen that episode where like Kramer and his friend are like doing that? Like that's their job. And like, he's like, oh, I got gonorrhea again. Like, sorry. But yeah. So they have to like act out these things. And
is that the Junior Man episode where the Junior Man
goes in? No,
okay.
wait. It's a different episode, but it's, yeah. But anyway.
So it's a real thing.
Both good episodes.
And a funny thing.
That's amazing. I love that. I didn't know it was like actually a real thing. I kind of thought they just made that up. So
yeah.
Wow. Well, we've learned so many things. So I do want to ask a little bit too. You touched on your next project, but just a reminder, if anyone has questions out there, go ahead and get those in the chat. But so your next project, you mentioned a sequel. So are we going to see like Gail and the same group of kids like coming back in this next one?
So it's not a sequel exactly, but it is in the world of. So I guess there's this like alternate reality where movies kind of like fuse into real life, where like in this reality, Jaws was filmed, but there are also these kids doing this, and there's this weird secret history of Martha's Vineyard. So in the next book, we follow Elijah, who, working on Shark Summer, he was the character that became like super important to the book because he adds a bit of levity. Like there's the girl Maddie who lives in a lighthouse with books, and she's like actually ends up being the antagonist. I think that's me. And if I was just set to my own devices, I'd make a book of Maddie's.
I was like, she's me. Come on, because
she is also you, Kim.
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
but like Elijah is the thing that kind of balances the scales a bit, so you can enter into Maddie's world a little easy. It's a less rocky journey. So Elijah is going to be the character that follows through these series. So in the next book, he gets a letter from an author in the Colorado Rockies and we can talk a little bit about Colorado, Florida, because that's where you are, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So
I'm interested for you to see this book, see if I got it, because I haven't been to Colorado in a long time and was not able to get there while working on this book. But Elijah goes to Colorado to a certain hotel from like a famous Stephen King book. Of course, like the names are a little different to protect the innocent, being me and not getting sued. And he meets this reclusive author. So obviously it's like kind of Shining inspired, which was way harder than Jaws because Shining has like a drunk alcoholic murdering father, which is like maybe the most scary thing you could put in a middle grade book. So trying to like make that character work without being horrifically terrifying was a challenge. So it's been a long journey, but it's good. But it's another kind of like mystery, twisty. It's more of a mystery, twisty, unsolved thing than Shark Summer was. But yeah, so, and then the next one after that, I don't know, I'll do like a Jim Henson thing or something. So.
Wow. Well, you know, like puppets and Muppets, they can be scary though.
Yeah, the Dark Crystal.
Yeah, there you go. Every kind of ventriloquist like puppet ever.
Sure.
Yeah, there. Every single one. Well, that's so cool. And Fleur, I believe that you've had some experiences. Is it with this hotel? Because I know you were telling us last time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So Midnight at the Barclay Hotel is based on the same thing, the hotel of The Shining, and it's super fun to take something that is, I think, that's real, and then sort of use that as a springboard for your story. So actually that brings me to something that I'm kind of curious about, Ira. So do you start with that idea of, okay, I'm going to take this adult thing, you know, this thing for adults, and then use that as my seed for the story? How does that work for you? Because I'm sort of curious about that.
Hold on. What do you mean by thing for adults? You mean in terms of like this? Like the movie?
Yeah,
like
we have Jaws, we have
Yeah.
The Shining. I mean, obviously, those are things that you can't. It's not like you can literally translate that for kids. So,
Right.
is that how your process starts? Where that's the springboard, where you're thinking, I am going to do? Because that's sort of how I started, where I was like, okay, I'm going to do an Agatha Christie for kids.
Yeah.
And then, you know, sort of take that and keep that as my guiding light, so to speak. I'm sort of curious how that was for you as a process for this book and the coming book.
Yeah, I guess that's like the main interest for me is how I can push like more like complicated themes into children's stories. I think, you know, like I teach a lot, I'm with kids a lot, and it's a fun game to see like what you can talk about with them and like how far their brain will go with it, because I'm just like with all these kids, so it's like a fun experiment. And growing up, there weren't, and the same is true for all four of us, that the genres weren't as clear in terms of like what's for kids. Like when we were kids, PG-13 wasn't even a type of movie. Things were just either R, X, or G, and then in the middle you're just like watching all this crazy stuff that wasn't really for kids, but they didn't know how to market it. So now, because like librarians can clearly find the stuff that's like safe, I think unless a kid is really persistent and interested, they're not going to like find strange things, like read a weird Michael Crichton book, or like I did. I read all of them when I was in like 5th grade, just because that's what was around. So I guess in my mind, just getting older, I'm like, oh, how do I kind of touch at bigger stories or ideas or movies that kids might not be finding in their books? Because I just want like a spooky book to be spooky in that way, where it's like, ooh, what is this person thinking about? Like, what else is out there? Because I remember thinking that with like reading something like even Stephen King, he's constantly talking about movies and other references, and it made you want to like go find those references, and then, you know, it expands from there. So I think that's kind of the idea, is like getting kids curious to kind of like excel their literacy, I guess, or whatever.
Well, I love like it's kind of like this nostalgia element though, and because most things for kids, like even picture books, the best picture books are the ones that like a kid can read and an adult can read and like be just as enthused and like find it just as funny. So it speaks on like both those levels. I feel like you have that nostalgia level, like kind of like a Stranger Things, because like when kids are watching it, they're like, yeah, it's cool. And when we're watching it, we're like, oh my God, it's like Walden Books. I'm so excited. So it's like this whole other level. So I love that. And I could feel also the nostalgia coming through for like the location, like Martha's Vineyard. Like there's the part in the beginning where the kids are going on the tour and you're kind of like lovingly showing us like all the little shops and all this stuff. So I'm just wondering, like, do you have a personal connection to Martha's Vineyard?
Well, I've been there a couple times and I was there as a kid. My family is from like the Revere Beach area originally. And so like New England and islands and sort of that era of the historical stuff that area like locks onto is very familiar to me. So not specifically Martha's Vineyard, but like a lot of those islands. And also the culture of like my dad was a silversmith and my mom was a teacher, but before I was born, they just lived in a van and traveled around and did craft shows. So that like economy of Gail's mother and how she just wants to have her own small business, but she doesn't have any money yet to back it up. So she can't just do it. She has to like work probably do like 4 jobs to keep it going. Like that was like my life growing up. My parents both, my dad wanted to do his thing. My mom taught, but she also was a yoga teacher and they were both very artistic. So there was always this struggle of like, how do you fulfill, like feed a family, but also like be yourself. So, I really wanted that to be in the book, and Martha's Vineyard kind of represents that in a way because it ties to nostalgia and like it's fishing culture. And then of course, Jaws and all these things are people like build businesses around them and off season, they struggle. So, I wanted that economy stuff to be there, partly because I had made that book about the creative economy and it's really always comes down to money that you get to do something. And it's easier to write a book than make a movie. So like I can make a book. I'll never be a director because I don't have, the resources for that, I guess. But I wanted it to be about like these kids can barely do it because like there's always like this money element looming. So I just felt like that was like an important thing to give the book some believability.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true. It's so true. But also the part, like you said, like that's the cool thing about books. And I know, that's for me because I'm like, I live in the middle of the country. I'm in like Oklahoma. Like I can't go out and be like, I'm going to get involved in the film industry. I can't do any of that. But guess what? Like you can write a book where it's all self-contained and you do every aspect of it. And you're not reliant on like any industry being in your town or anything like that. So that is the cool thing about books. But we love movies too. And we had a question from Kathy. Hi, Ira. Did your research include talking to people who are involved with Jaws? The movie making was really interesting to me. And my kid, your former student, works on films now. Oh.
That's true. Hi, Kathy. Well, I didn't. A lot of people came out of the woodwork to tell me about how they were on Martha's Vineyard when Jaws was being filmed, but nobody really had any particular insights. But I did read a couple good books. There's this book called The Jaws Log. Brenda's in the way, so I can't quite see it, but I can't remember the author, but it's a real nerdy breakdown of like the day-to-day of making the film and how the script was being constantly worked on as they were filming, and it was like being edited on location and all this stuff, and the shark didn't work because it was like all foam and the pneumatics kept breaking. So it's a real like crazy journey to just, movies are a miracle that they get made once you start to like learn how it happens. So I read that book. That was super useful. And there's a lot of like little touches in Shark Summer. I do a lot of changing names. Like Elijah points out the editor of Jaws when they're in the big dining hall, but I like change her name and stuff. And Steven Spielberg is not Steven Spielberg. And the brands of cameras are all different. But yeah, there is a lot of historical references. And it's just very easy to Google Jaws and like learn a lot about that movie because it's so many like cinephiles, like favorite film, like there's a million podcasts about Jaws. So it was a really easy one to start out with when I was like, what's a summer movie everybody's at least heard of or seen a meme about? Like Jaws is the one, I think. So that's how I settled on that. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, speaking of like just the nostalgia and kind of like all of this, like, this interest surrounding Jaws, like, do you ever think about like how strange it is that this one movie that I'm sure they didn't expect to become this phenomena, like became what it is today? It's like this thing that films, like everybody's talking about, like everybody still knows. That's so strange. Like, do you ever think about that as an artist? Like, what is it, like this magical thing that's out of our control that turns
Yeah.
something into like the next Jaws or whatever?
Well, I think that's like when you're working on something, that's what you kind of secretly imagine might happen. Like you might make the thing that kind of like
Yep.
defines something that never existed, so it's kind of that. It really was like you brought up nostalgia and like how you can use that and how easily it's done now because it's like so recognizable to like see 80s aesthetic like in a movie, like Stranger Things like made it clear what the 80s is, even though if it's true or not, who knows anymore. But like the 80s is Stranger Things, and like Jaws is like 70s blockbuster cinema. It's like grainy, it's hot, everybody is sunburnt, like the clothes are all really tight. There's a lot of yellow, like lemon yellow. There's certain things that I wanted to bring into that book and evoke like a summer, because like, well, actually I'd like to ask this question of the group so you can think about this for a minute and then maybe we can go around. But it just seemed like, summer is always a nostalgic thing when you're young, and to have like the Jaws summer that everybody's kind of familiar with makes it like ultimate nostalgia memory, because we all like can picture it to some degree, even though like none of us were really there. So that's why I chose that. I'm like, it's going to be really fun to spend a year telling a story in this world of what it might be like to step through the TV and like be in this movie. So I thought, can we go around the room here, and maybe everybody could say, like, if you could tell a story set in a movie, like I did, it could be like kind of around a movie, like the making of, or like within the movie. What movie would you do? What movie would you tell a story in?
Oh, wow, you're asking us the tough ones. I feel like I'm gonna have to think about this one.
I should have put this in an email earlier.
Ooh, I know that. Well, so we're talking about like when we were kids, like we didn't necessarily have that middle grade section of books that were appropriate for kids. And I also didn't like watch movies that were like appropriate for kids necessarily, you know what I mean? And so like I remember one of my all-time favorite movies from when I was really little was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I was just really in love with Dr. Frankenfurter. And so I love Tim Curry. So I'm thinking like, Tim Curry in Rocky Horror, or Tim Curry in It, like the old made-for-TV version, because that was like classic, or Tim Curry in Clue. So like maybe Clue, like doing something
Clue,
like maybe Clue would be my choice that would actually work. And I could definitely see, I mean, there are a lot of ones like Fleur's book and the like Green Glass House series, and like there's a lot of mysteries that are kind of like that classic mystery, like whether it's like the Snowden hotel that's haunted and they're solving the mystery, or like whatever it is. But yeah, like so I would love to redo like that classic mystery with like the butler and the socialites, and they're all hiding a secret and someone dies and it's middle grade, and I think that could really work.
Oh, yeah. I like the Tim Curry trilogy that you're also kind of building up towards. Where
I don't know why. I just thinking back to my childhood, and like this was my childhood. Like apparently my childhood was Tim Curry themed. I don't know. It happened. So what about Adriana or Fleur?
I think for me, and I don't, it wasn't a childhood movie, that's for dang sure, but I really like Pan's Labyrinth. Like visually, that's a really cool film, and like I like Guillermo del Toro and everything he does, but like I think you could just have a lot of fun with the creatures in that movie. And I think when that movie came out, people focused so much on the visuals because they're incredible, and the creatures that I sometimes I think they missed there were a lot of layers to that story. And so I think you could have there's a lot to do there with the source material. But then my favorite movie of all time is Train to Busan. So I would love to do something with that because I've been itching to write a zombie middle grade and I have it planned. So.
Ooh. Man, I'm glad you brought up Pan's Labyrinth because that's like a top 5 movie for me, I think.
It's
like,
good.
Long term. Yeah. And I think the historic, like the way it is like fantasy, but in like a very specific historical moment, but like on the fringes of it, I think that like was a big inspiration for Shark Summer. It's like the story outside of like the main story, kind of, you know.
Yeah. I just like it because it's a really good example, for me at least, of what I think of Latinx fantasy storytelling. Like that is very emblematic of how we tell fantasy stories. And so that's why I like that one a lot. Yeah.
I love me some magical realism. I mean, most of my books are magical realism. I would say that's a great example. I love that type of fantasy too. Fleur, what would you say?
Oh, it's tough because a lot of movies I think of are kid movies already, like Night at the Museum or A Haunted Mansion. They're just fun, you know. As far as stuff that's sort of nostalgic, Sneakers was a fun movie, and anything heisty. Lately, I'm like, oh, I just want a good heist thing, you know, something fun where you know, you're kind of relying on the cleverness of the people in it to propel the story forward. So yeah, that would be fun. I like this sort of idea of taking something that is totally not necessarily made for kids and then finding a way to make it accessible. I think that's super cool.
I think it would be hilarious to watch Sneakers now because I feel like all the tech and everything that's in the movie that helps them like do their espionage is so obsolete and hilarious.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It was already in my own book. I think I mentioned an MP3 player,
Right.
First book, which is so incredibly dated already. It's not even that.
There's
long
a lot
ago,
of times that when I'm writing, I'll check with my son. I'm like, do people still use this? No, Mom, no one uses that anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that Sneakers, I might have seen that movie more than any other movie. I had the tape for some reason. I just would watch it all the time. It's like a perfect, like heist. There's no like boring moment in it. It just like comes together.
It's a buddy thing too. I think it's the characters, and I think that's what I loved about yours. When I was starting to read Shark Summer, I'm like, man, it's the first 5-6 pages or so, and I'm in. And you use so little for a novelist just to look at that and go, wow, so little dialogue, and I know exactly what the characters are about. So just hugely impressed by that.
Yeah, I think that's like the cool thing with comics is you can kind of imply, or you can, I don't know, the language of cartooning is like kind of magical and like so familiar. Like cartoons are like the first films you've watched, like Bambi, like things that are like quite mature in their storytelling ability because they're so refined and condensed. Because you have to literally draw every like 10th of a second. There's something like cool about cartooning that's like extremely efficient, especially when you start to get into the history of it.
What makes me surprised by people who go, oh, you know, it's a graphic novel, that, you know, sometimes I'll be at an event and a parent will call, well, my kid doesn't like to read. I'm like, well, just start with a graphic novel. And they're like, you know, like it's somehow inferior, where I find as a reader, I have to pay far closer attention to what's going on in both the image and the text. So it's a sophisticated kind of reading where I'm thinking, you know, I'm actually finding it harder sometimes to read a graphic novel because you really do have to pay attention to everything. Like you said, there's so much being said in just one image. So yeah, it's interesting reading it from a novelist perspective because it teaches you to sort of go, okay, how could I be more economical with my words, my imagery? I think that's what's really great about graphic novels.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I was gonna say, I think for me, I love graphic novels because as somebody with ADHD, my eye gets to move across the page the way that I want it. when I'm reading just a regular prose novel, I scan a lot because my eye wants to move faster. And so that's what I love about graphic novels, because there's so much to take in. So my eyes get to bounce around, I guess you could say, quite a bit. And so it's really satisfying for my brain to read a graphic novel. And so that's what I loved about Shark Summer, because it was so visually appealing and there was like so much to take in, and I could, move around the way I wanted.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, it really is a full design project. Like, I really don't, I mean, you can read it on like a tablet or whatever if you want, but you really have to have the book, because it's so much about looking, like opening up and what you're seeing as you turn a page. And yeah, I think like, so many parents come up to me if I do a workshop or something, like, your kids love graphic novels because they're so engaging and they're rewarding simply because you can get through one in a day if you want, and like go on to another one. I think, like you were saying, there's just a simple pleasure of like, I'm done with that page. What's next? Like, just turning a page like feels so good. In comics, like you're constantly turning. And you can put maps and things like in the mid. I mean, a lot of like books do that, of course, but with comics, you can really like weave in graphic arts and design stuff into a book. And I really like take advantage with that, because I love, I mean, like if I could be like a cartographer or something, I'd do that. Like I wouldn't rather, but like I love just like thinking about map design and like planning that stuff out and trying to make everything, fit in a certain space. So I definitely like use that, like to show like a diagram of the lighthouse, just because I could, like it wasn't necessary, but it's just like a fun thing to look at.
Yeah, so like when they go, like Maddie goes to her dad's like map room and stuff and is showing Gail around. Is that like your secret dream, to have a giant room just full of maps?
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, I guess just tangible things are like, they seem more fleeting than ever, but it just seems like nice to have an old map room. But luckily you can still go to, like, I've definitely been to my library bunch and like looked at old maps just because you can. Like, that's the fun thing about being a writer, is like you have an excuse just to go look at something weird, because you're going to make a book about it.
It's for my job.
It's research. Sure. It's research. Yeah. I love that. Well, I know we're just about out of time. So if anyone wants to get a last minute question, stick that in the comments. But I know there are a lot of people out there who maybe are interested in writing their own comics or graphic novels. So do you have any advice that you want to leave with people who are just getting started?
Well, the good thing about a comic is all you need is a pencil and a piece of paper to do it. You don't even have to draw that well, because like just get started is the cool thing about comics. When I was a kid, I drew comics with my friends. Like, they're very interactive. Like, you can draw a panel and somebody else can. It's just different than writing. Writing is a little harder to bring people together in a process. But like with drawing and comics, it can be so collaborative, which is cool. So, like find a way to make comics with your friends if you're a kid. And I don't know, anybody can email me if they have questions about it. I mean, I teach on Skillshare. I have like 16 classes there on sequential art and comics and like concept art and things like that. So, I've made a bunch of classes. Those are there to watch on how to make comics. So
cool. I love it. Yeah, we'll check those out. And actually, I was checking out the Skillshare website because I was like, maybe I should do a class. And guess whose face pops up on there? Ira Marcks. As like one of their top teachers. I was like, whoa, that's
You
awesome.
should do a class. If you need some tips on how to do it.
I do. You can tell me after all the tips. That will be awesome. And why don't you tell people, so we know they can find you on Skillshare, why don't you tell people where else they can find you online?
Well, if you enjoyed Shark Summer, if you want to learn more about it, you can visit sharksummer.com, where I share a whole bunch of the making of the book. I tried to make it a website that I would have wanted when I was a kid, reading a book and being like, that's the end. I want to know more. It's like, well, you can go to the website and learn more. So sharksummer.com, and Ira Marcks on social medias, and I share things sometimes, but not too often. I'm serious.
I like that. I share things sometimes. That is awesome. Well, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and Fleur, Adriana, and especially Ira. Well, especially Brenda. Let's give Brenda the credit that is due. Yes, thank you so much, Brenda, for joining us tonight. And what a fun time talking about Shark Summer. And if you haven't read it yet, definitely go check it out. And we also have a very cool book that we are talking about next month, and it's called Josephine Against the Sea by Shakira Bourne. So I'm going to play us out with the date and time for next month's Book Club Live. But once again, thanks everyone. And if you want to find out more about the Spooky Middle Grade authors or our free school visits that we're offering this spring, head over to spookymiddlegrade.com and you can learn more about those. So thanks so much, everyone, especially Brenda. Bye.